Hi, I'm Art Kaplan. I'm at the Division of Medical Ethics at the NYU Langone Health System. A study appeared recently about pig brains, and it got incredible attention. People are talking about it still. Yale University Medical School scientists basically went to a slaughterhouse, took about 25 animals, removed their brains, put them in kind of a vat, and then poured in certain chemicals, used certain electrical stimulation, and although these pig brains were out of the body of the pig and had been sitting there with nothing done to them for 4 or 5 hours, they produced electrical activity in parts of these brains. The headlines that accompanied this particular experiment were off the wall. There were announcements such as, pigs restored to partial life. Partial life? What is partial life? You're either alive or you're not. You may be in a coma, you may be permanently vegetative, but if you're dead, you're dead, and if you're in these other states, you're alive. There is no such thing as partial life. So the media is suggesting falsely, and some comments from some people who were asked to comment on the experiment, including some bioethicists, that there's this intermediate state that we should start to recognize, intermediate life. Having electrical activity in some cells in a disorganized manner in a pig brain is an interesting finding. It's certainly something that I think a lot of people wouldn't have expected could be done 4 hours after the animal had died and literally been slaughtered. But it doesn't prove that there's some kind of semi-life existence just because cells are firing up. Similarly, there was some suggestion that the pigs had been, who had undergone this experiment, the fact that their brains showed electrical activity with the right stimuli cast doubt on this whole idea of brain death. Now, we have enough problem explaining to the public what brain death is. There are certainly some people who are skeptical about the whole idea of brain death. And the notion is that once the brain has stopped working and brain death pronounced, it's irreversible. The media kind of suggested, and again some commentators suggested as well, that if you get this electrical activity back, then maybe that kind of brain death is not irreversible, and then maybe we don't have brain death. This is dangerous because it discourages people from accepting pronouncements of death in the hospital. They read these kinds of stories and start to think, well, maybe they're only half dead, maybe they're not really dead. Or worse, it kills people because some people are going to say, I'm not going to be an organ donor because I heard of an experiment where you restored the brain to activity. Look, again, getting electrical activity from cells under extreme circumstances with the right chemicals and the right electrical stimulation doesn't prove that the animal wasn't dead when it was slaughtered. It merely proves that our organic architecture is such that cells do want to fire, but it doesn't prove that somehow or another you can reverse death. That is way out of line from this experiment. The last gripe I had is that there were actually some descriptions that said pig restored to consciousness. Well, if you want to scare the American people, frighten our patients, tell them that you can take a brain, put it in a vat, stimulate it, and make it conscious. That's an old trope in many films. I remember Steve Martin had comedy routines about this, but the idea of the brain in the vat that's conscious is beloved by science fiction and Hollywood movie makers everywhere. Usually the brain, by the way, starts inching around a little bit when it's in the vat to show you that it's conscious. There is no consciousness in a pig brain just because cells are firing. Consciousness requires higher level awareness. Conscious requires integrated brain activity, organized brain function. The idea that if you see cells that fire up is somehow reflective of the fact that that brain is thinking, that's just lousy medicine and lousy biology and will again frighten people. So, I'm not against doing a study to see what sorts of activity might occur in a brain that has been from an animal that has been dead for many hours. It may be useful to understand patterns of activity. It may be that someday we might even figure out for brain damaged people how to stimulate some part of the brain to get some cells firing. But the notion that there is a partial definition of life, that somebody could be semi-alive, half alive, a little bit alive, that has to be rejected and ruled out. The idea that any sort of brain activity is reflective of consciousness, that has to be ruled out. And the notion that just because cells fire in a disorganized manner, in a kind of blob of activity, somehow cast doubt on the idea that the animal was dead in the first place, that really has to be ruled out. I'm Art Kaplan at the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU. Thanks for watching.